Welcome to another episode of the Tom Schimmer Podcast. Happy Monday, everyone. Hope everyone had a great weekend. We had the most glorious weekend weather-wise here in Vancouver. Nicest weekend we've had in 2021 for sure, weather-wise. Getting outside in the warmth was wonderful. And all of that vitamin D, of course, will do wonders for our immune systems. That's just what the doctor ordered. I hope you had the same kind of weather this weekend. If you didn't, I hope it's on its way soon. It was good for the soul. Now, here in Vancouver, of course, we don't take the weather for granted. We know that we can have these glorious weekends in April, and we could have rain in early May, and it just, it's just one of those things that we have to always brace ourselves for, if you will. But it was a fabulous weekend and just really, really re-energized as a result of this weather for sure. Thanks for listening in again this week. And as I always say, a big welcome to any new listeners joining in for the first time. Your listening and subscribing to the podcast is appreciated. And again, please don't be shy about spreading the word on social media or with your colleagues. And if you feel up to leaving a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts, that would be much appreciated as well. Today, my guest is LaVonna Roth. She is the founder and lead presenter at Ignite Your Shine. It's an inspiring conversation, and you're going to find out, if you don't know already, what the acronym SHINE stands for. In Assessment Corner this week, we're going to finish off the examination on homework. Today, we're going to focus on whether homework should contribute to a student's proficiency grade, and I'll leave you with 6 questions you can ask yourself about your homework routine. So that's today's plan. Let's get to it. LaVonna Roth is coming up. But first, I want to open this week with the story of Father Phil and why he was responsible for my entering education as a profession. Now, growing up, I was a sports fanatic. I loved everything about sports. I played it, I watched it, almost to a fault. As an adult now, I'm still all about sports. It's my escape. NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, NHL, and even soccer, both domestically with the MLS and internationally as well. I follow it all. When I'm on the road, which I hope to again one day, it's how I love to spend my free time. I'm a full season ticket holder for the Vancouver Whitecaps, our MLS club here in Vancouver. I'm a member of the supporters club called the Southsiders. And while I'm not really an active member, like I'm not on the board or anything like that, my tickets are in the supporters section, and I'm all about the cheering, the singing, the chanting, and everything about what's positive with soccer culture. I love it. I have a quarter season ticket package for the Vancouver Canucks. That's our NHL team here in Vancouver. Now, a quarter season because I am, or at least I was pre-pandemic, I was on the road a lot, and so I would miss a lot of games. And hockey tickets are really expensive in a Canadian market, so a quarter season ticket was just fine. I'll give you an example. My full season tickets for soccer are half of what my quarter season tickets are for hockey. So hockey can be expensive in a Canadian market, that's for sure. Now, my love of sports began with soccer when I was 6. And, that's normally how it begins with most young children. Now, I was very tall for my age. I'm as an adult, I'm 6'2", which isn't super tall, but as a kid, I was literally towering over everyone. So I ended up as a goalie in soccer. Put the big kid in net, right? Now, today, that's not so bad because with youth soccer, there are a lot of small-sided games now, so goalies see a lot of action. But when I was young, it was 11 on 11 on a full-size field. Now, sometimes the ball would be at the other end of the field for 30 minutes. I mean, it was brutal, and sometimes, quite honestly, it was boring. Now, I grew up in North Vancouver. And so North Vancouver is at the foot of the North Shore Mountains in the Metro Vancouver area. It's the rainiest part of Metro Vancouver by far. So often my dad would come down to my goal area with an umbrella to keep me from getting, completely drenched from the rain. Because when that biblical rain hits North Vancouver, you start looking for 2x4s and animal pairings, I can tell you that. Now, I started playing baseball when I was 8. Baseball was my absolute favorite sport growing up. And as you heard me say a few weeks ago with the start of the Major League Baseball season, I still love baseball. I was a really good pitcher, and I could hit too. I was a really good player. When I wasn't pitching, I played first base, and I had a really good run as a baseball player when I was young. When I was 14, for example, probably a great moment in sports history for me when I was 14. I actually pitched a perfect game to win our league championship. It was a 7-inning game. I faced 21 batters, and I struck out 20 of them, and we won the game 9-0. I wasn't a flamethrower. I wasn't like this person that could, at my peak, I probably hit, mid to upper 80s, which was pretty good speed for that era. But today's standards, seems like every prospect throws over 90 miles an hour easy. But my coaches taught me how to pitch, and that's what I really appreciated. And they taught me the difference between being a pitcher and a thrower. And when I learned to, spot my pitches, and when I learned how to pitch, keeping batters off balance, throwing a 2-0 curveball or a 3-1 changeup, that's when I got really good. I had baseball for me. I had some nibbles to play at the college level a little bit, and I did have a couple of tryouts and with professional clubs, but that really wasn't the route that I chose. And to be honest, I wasn't good enough to do anything serious in baseball. Now, football is how I became a teacher. Now, ironically, football was probably my least favorite sport to play when I was growing up, but it was why I attended Boise State University on a football scholarship. Now, before you get too excited about my football scholarship, okay, I was a punter, okay? So how's that for a little disappointment? My ability to kick went all the way back to my soccer days. So, of course, as a goalie, I would often punt the ball out of the 18-yard area. So it was a rather unique skill set. And long story short, I end up at Boise State University. I was recruited in Canada to play quarterback because I played quarterback in high school, but I wasn't close to good enough to play quarterback at Boise State. I had a decent career at Boise State. I was drafted into the Canadian Football League. I played 1 year with the Ottawa Rough Riders in the CFL. It wasn't a great season. The next year, 1990, I was released from my contract, and I went back to finish my teaching career. So I put my athletic career in the rearview mirror after that. Now, there's another story behind all of that, but I'll save that for another podcast. It was a very critical life lesson for me during that entire experience. Now, little fun fact about my career at Boise State, September 13th, 1986 was our home opener, and that was the very first game on the blue turf at Boise State. So I still have the poster, the commemorative poster on my wall in my office. Football was how I became a teacher, of course, because I got my teaching degree at Boise State, but basketball is why. I didn't play basketball until I was in grade 7, but by that time, I was a pretty good athlete and I picked it up pretty quickly. So I get to high school, and my high school was grades 8 through 12, right? Shout out to Windsor High School, Windsor Secondary School in School District 44 in North Vancouver. So I go to high school and I'm in the 8th grade, and we come together to form our grade 8 basketball team. So this is 1980, 1981. Now we end up winning the Metro Vancouver City Championships. And we're feeling pretty good, we're just new to high school and kind of living this experience. And we knew we had a special team because obviously we'd just come off the championship. This was a group of guys that had come together from various elementary schools, and we kind of put it all together in that grade 8 year. So the next year, we get a new coach. We get a coach who was a counselor who transferred from Handsworth Secondary School to take the job at my high school. So he became a counselor and he was a basketball coach. His name was Phil Langley, and who would go on to be known as Father Phil. Phil was a fantastic coach. So in grade 9, we played in the grade 10 league at the grade 10 level, and we were competitive, and we held our own with most of the teams around the city and even some of the best teams that were going. But the 1 year difference for us physically and mentally and all of that was huge. But Phil was teaching us how to win. Now, in my grade 10 year, basketball-wise, things changed tremendously when David Lodgins transferred to our school. David was a year older, and when I was in grade 10, we actually played at the senior varsity level. He was a year older, and he was 6'11". So we had a big man who was, of course, of age, because at that time, senior varsity was grades 11 and 12. So we had a big man who was of age, and 4 grade 10 kids, myself included, all of whom were starters and all who could shoot. We ended up that season 1 game away from making the provincial tournament. We lost a play-in game to make that tournament, but we knew we were on to something special. In my grade 11 year, it was magical. And we didn't win the provincial title, but we spent many weeks as the number 1 ranked team in the province and had 6 weeks prior to the close of the season, had beat the team that went on to win the championship by 30 points. Now, we got upset. We were, in the second round. We had foul trouble, lots of excuses. Let it go, Tom. It was 37 years ago. But who's counting, right? My senior year, my grade 12 year, we weren't as good, of course, without David. David went on to play basketball at the University of Wyoming. We made the tournament, but we didn't make it out of the second round, and it just kind of fizzled from there. But Phil Langley, our coach, was like a second father to me. Well, to all of us. Hence, we gave him the nickname Father Phil. Like many teenage boys, I had a complicated relationship with my dad. It's nothing worth putting in an after-school special or anything like that, and my parents were really supportive of me. And I look back now and I realize that a lot of it was my fault, and it kind of stemmed from some emotional immaturity at the time. So don't read too much into the idea that I had a complicated relationship with my dad. It's not that big a deal, but it was just complicated. Phil was just a different voice with a different approach, and I respected him tremendously. He pushed us. He was tough. He was supportive. He was cerebral. I had great coaches in all of my sports who taught me so many things about the sport and just how to handle adversity and things like that, but Phil was on another level. Now, we knew as players that his counseling background gave him this. Plus, he was the adult, but it gave him this kind of psychological edge on us. But we didn't care because we trusted him. He was on us if we got too cocky. He was with us when our confidence was shaken. I'll never forget a game we played in my grade 10 year against Abbotsford Secondary School. And it was a packed gym. We're in the 10th grade. David Lodgins was in grade 11. It was a packed gym Friday night. Abbotsford was the number 1 ranked team in the province by a long shot. These, to a grade 10 boy, these were men we were playing against. They were monsters. We got worked so hard in the first half that it's the only time I ever had thoughts about not going out after halftime. I have never been so physically, mentally, and emotionally intimidated athletically in my life, ever in that moment. That's the only time I ever thought, I don't really want to play the second half. That was not good. But Father Phil was there, helping us see the big picture, helping us understand that this game was going to help us down the road. And it did the following season. He was always there. The stress of school, being a teenager, inspiring us to be our best selves. That was Father Phil. And that's what I wanted to be for young athletes. So that's why I became a teacher. I became a teacher because I wanted to coach. Now, I learned to love the profession, of course, after I entered it. And my career has gone in a direction I never would have imagined in 1991. But I wanted to, in those early days, I wanted to be for young athletes, for young people, what Father Phil was for me. I admired him. I appreciated him. I wasn't always happy with him. We had our moments. But he was everything to me as an athlete and as a young man. He nurtured without coddling us. He pushed us without breaking us. He always saw the big picture and how today's hard work led to tomorrow's greatness. He is singularly responsible for me going into education. My one regret? I never told him. I don't know what I have been for athletes I've coached, or for students I've taught, or for educators I've worked with. Our legacy is for others to decide. But if I've had even half the impact on others that Phil had on me, then I will, when this is all over, be able to look myself in the eye and say, you did it. So this is my tribute to Father Phil, a man whose legacy lives on in me, a man who put his arm around me when I needed it, a man who also put his forearm in my chest, yes, literally, when I needed to toughen up. It was a different time back then. It's a man who taught me during the insane conditioning drills that you'll pass out before you die, so don't worry about it. It's not exactly 2021 coaching tactics, but again, as I said, it's a different time. And honestly, I wouldn't trade it for anything. So here's to Father Phil, and all of you Father Phils out there. This is where I want you to at me. Pay tribute to your Father Phil. I'd love to hear from you. Who's that for you? Who inspired you to be an educator? Doesn't have to be a coach, maybe a teacher. Who knows? But at me if you got someone in mind. I would love that. Let's remember why we do this job. Let's remember who it's all about. Let's remember that our legacy will live on, whether we know it or not, within those we impact through the course of our careers. Joining me today for the interview is LaVonna Roth. She is the founder and lead speaker at Ignite Your Shine. She's an author. She's a speaker who provides professional development and services for educators literally around the world. LaVonna describes her passion as being to empower educators to find the greatness within their students and also the greatness within ourselves as educators so that we can radically change the traditional approach to education in order to best serve our students through the lens of brain research, through the lens of social emotional needs, and through the idea of the lens of the whole child. So I'm really excited to have LaVonna joining me today. So LaVonna, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Oh, anytime, Tom. Great to see you, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to reconnect. I remember our connection at a conference a number of years ago and just remember being very impressed by your keynote presentation. And just, when I started the podcast, I knew you were someone I wanted to have on. So as I said to you, you've been on the list for a long time. So I'm glad we were able to find time to make this happen. So it's great to have you. So let's begin with, but before we dig into how we can ignite everyone's shine, let's begin with the LaVonna Roth story. Let's talk about the highlights of your career as an educator. You began teaching in 1996 at the Hilliard City School District in Columbus, Ohio. So take us through the evolution of your career. Let's talk about, how do you go from starting teaching in 1996 to ending up here as a internationally recognized expert and speaker and leader in the area of social emotional learning and the whole child.
Yes. So, wow, you're taking me back. I'm feeling old with the 1996, Tom. Do you have to really say that? No.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. Age is just the thing. So
there you go.
Yeah, I started out in 1996 in Hilliard City Schools, and I was teaching 7th and 8th grade, and it was a crazy moment of being a brand new teacher. And I have a degree in deaf education, but I also am certified for elementary, and that went up through 8th grade. And so a first year of teaching, and I'm at a school that I ended up teaching 5 preps. So anyone who does dairy knows that's typically not. But not only was I teaching 5 different preps, but I was also on a cart. I didn't have my own room, and we were in a 2-story building. So between classes that were only 3 minutes apart, I would have to get my cart down the crowded hallway, up the elevator, all the good stuff, including setting up science labs. So, years later, I went to my principal, who I truly admire. But I went to him and I said, what were you thinking doing that to a first year teacher? And so I made it. I totally made it, kept going and loved it. And I taught 5 years in Ohio, and then the beautiful weather of Florida drew me down. So I came down here, and a crazy part of this was I only had 1 day to get a job when I flew down. And so I ended up getting a 2nd grade position. And when I talk about going through culture shock,
I would
7th,
imagine.
8th grade, yes, to 2nd grade, I was like, what do you mean you don't know how to tie your shoes? Sweetheart, you have snot running down your face and the tissues are right there. So all of those moments that I ended up falling in love with them, but I knew in that moment that I was meant for older. So I ended up teaching 5th grade for a few years. After that, went back to middle school. And then I had the opportunity to step out, and I was actually getting ready to interview as an assistant principal. My 2nd master's is in educational leadership. And I had a moment of someone saying, hey, why don't you try this? And I thought, well, you know what? If I'm going to, before I commit to be going into administration, maybe I should step out and just try some other things. So that's led to a totally different path for me, anywhere from working for a university and doing sales recruitment for them, for educators to get their master's or doctorate degree, to working as the regional manager of the Southeast for them and managing reps in 5 states, to then working for a company that is no longer in existence. I was laid off, and I saw the company like a month and a half into me being there. Everyone in marketing was laid off, which was a huge flag to me. And then I ended up being part of the layoff and hit sheer panic. It's nice to have a dual income, but sometimes you also need the dual income. And
Right.
I have years and years and years of student loans. So fast forward through that, I ended up getting another job, and I was treated extremely poorly. I was screamed at and cussed out 1 minute, and then the next minute they would say, God put you in our life for a reason. We're so blessed to have you. And I found out I was the eighth person in 10 months in that position. And so I could tell you story after story, but bottom line is I ended up leaving there and jumping on my own. And so that was something I never planned on. I never planned on being a speaker. I actually have a very shy side to me that I've had to build confidence around. And so I would be petrified just to sit in a small group and like say my name and all of that. So it overcome that. And now, we are, like you said, it's been, and here we are fast forwarding to 2021. And technically, Tom, you don't even know this, but today that we're recording this, this is the 13th anniversary of me being in business, like
Wow.
today. So it's a huge celebration and nothing I ever planned on. So here
Yeah.
we are speaking, consulting, doing all things around the world, and books came along the way,
Yeah.
all through that.
Oh, it's such an interesting story. You made me think of so many different things. Your comment about second grade reminds me of what I often say to secondary teachers is, just go spend a day in a first grade or second grade or third grade classroom, because you are going to gain a new appreciation for being a secondary teacher because you'll be thankful. You won't know. I mean, it's such impressive work. And I think so often, um, in the system, uh, there's a kind of diminishing of the work because the students are younger. There can be this dismissiveness, and the work that happens at the elementary level, especially the youngest of grade levels, is incredibly monumental. The other thing you said, which I find very interesting when I speak to a lot of speakers, and I would include myself in this category, and in terms of the level of shyness, or the level of, people probably don't understand that, as a speaker, when you're speaking in front of an audience, you're in complete control. And when you're in a social situation, you often don't have control over that situation. So a lot of people can't understand how someone like yourself, who could speak in front of thousands of people, would be inherently shy or inherently reserved in a social situation. But it's actually quite common amongst many of us who do this work, who have these two sides to our personality. And I think part of it is that when we get on stage, we know what we're going to say. We're in control of the clicker. We have the microphone, and we've got our presentation, and we're ready to roll. But it's a kind of interesting dynamic that happens in between. Have you noticed that as well amongst many of the people who are in this world of speaking and authoring?
Yes, almost everybody I talk to says the
Mm-hmm.
exact same thing. And so I think control is a part of it. For me, I know another part of it is the fact that when I step on the stage or I'm working with a group, it is no longer about me, it's about the message.
Right.
So in a social aspect, all eyes are on you because they're talking about you.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when, you're speaking, it's not about me. It's about the message I'm there to deliver, to make an
Mm-hmm.
impact, support educators in every level that we can. And
Mm-hmm.
because I can make that switch, it's also why when I'm being introduced to a group, whether it's speaking on the stage or working in a school or a district, whatever, wherever I am, I usually ask, please don't introduce me unless you absolutely have to. And if you have to, then literally I want you to say, and here's our keynote speaker, LaVonna Roth,
There's
like
LaVonna.
as
Yeah.
minimal, right? Because the moment I'm about to go out, you just flipped the lens to me, and this isn't about me. And I
Right.
always say to them, they're like, but people want to know. And I'm like, and that's the people who already want to know. They've already Googled.
Right.
So they already know what they
Yeah,
want to
that's
know.
true. True. It is I just find it very interesting when I speak to so many speakers and authors. And the other thing you said before we move on, the other thing you said is that people often think there's this grand scheme of, in 20 years, I'm going to be this world renowned speaker that ignites the shine all around the world. And that's never the case. It sort of unfolds kind of in an organic way. And then suddenly 13 years into your business, here you are. And it never seems to, when I talk to so many people, it never seems to unfold that way. Okay, enough about them. Let's talk about LaVonna. Let's make it about you.
Get back on me.
That's right. Put the focus back on you. Let's start with the big ideas of Ignite Your Shine. For listeners who may not be familiar with your work, let's start with the big ideas here. What does Ignite Your Shine mean, and why do you believe that it's an essential part of a school's culture, where not only students feel inspired to achieve at their highest level, but educators feel inspired as well? So, what are the big ideas of Ignite Your Shine?
So we look at it as in the overall umbrella is really culture, but then there's so many segues underneath that with what happens. And we specifically coined the term human focused culture. Mm-hmm. So a lot of what we want to see happen in schools, whether it's with staff showing up, reducing attrition, making sure that they have what they need from a personal perspective so that it shows up professionally, to what actually happens with the learning in a classroom. And so if you use the human focused culture, like everything we do comes from the fact that we are humans, and we look at the brain research side of things, that's a key piece to all of this. So underneath it, it's using brain research. It is understanding people and how we operate and taking them through the acronym of SHINE, which I'm sure we'll get to later. Yep. It is all about that whole child, that whole person. And so we approach everything through that lens, because what you're really doing is you're creating psychological safety. And so as we look through the lens of psychological safety, then that puts the brain into a state of learning. It puts people into a space that they feel not only included, but all the way up to the highest level of psychological safety, which they feel that they can challenge things to really look at the status quo. Is this what's best for kids? Is this what's best for teachers, best for leadership, best for families? And you can really dive and explore that.
So what does SHINE stand for? That, of course, is an acronym. And so let's go through what that acronym means, and then I'll have a follow-up question for you on that.
Okay, yeah. So SHINE is, do you mind if I back up and tell a little bit as to
absolutely.
How it came to be?
Go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Take your time.
All right. So I was someone who did not do well in elementary. And then I did very well in elementary, got to middle school, grades started to decline, got into high school, I had D's and F's on my report card, and I got into college. I was put on probation to be kicked out because of my grades. And so along the way, started feeling very stupid. I felt that I wasn't smart. And so the word was not originally SHINE, it was originally SMART. And I was going after an education, how we define SMART, because my viewpoint is that we are phenomenal at putting kids into the box, and that box in education, at least here in the US, is reading, writing, math, and science. And that's the core focus of what we look at, that's why the whole child often gets lost in that mix. Social emotional learning, everything. But when we look at this, I had started out in brain research, and I had this passion in me for not only me, but my experiences my daughter went through in school, students that felt stupid. And I thought, I am totally going to go after this word SMART. And somebody said to me, LaVonna, you will never change the definition of SMART, not in education. Well, if anyone knows me, part of my personality went, watch me, right? Yeah. And then, of course, the other part, the lack of confidence at times went, what if they're right? And so I had to take a step back and really look at that. And I'm grateful to that person now, because what really stepped into my head was the word SHINE. And so I thought it is really how we shine. And I wanted an acronym because I wanted the acronym to be a framework that people can work within. So if you think about Ignite Your Shine, like Ignite Your personal shine, which also your professional shine, when we look at it, the S is all about self. So really what we're focusing on are what are your strengths, gifts, skills, and talents. So we're really focusing on the things that either you were born with or you've learned to develop at a high level. We're moving away from the view of what you can't do, and that's what a lot of us beat ourselves up. We play this comparison game. And if you see me on video, you're seeing I'm doing these little mirrors, which is my hand up. It's like a little mirror cupped toward me because I sign. So, I think that we start doing all these comparisons from social media, from the person teaching next door, the administrator leading across the county, whatever it may be. And so we start playing it. Well, what we forget is that we call it a lion of greatness, like a lion, Lion, like a lion of greatness. And that's standing in that. It's not just about strengths, though. So it's not about just your mindset and taking care of you and the strengths you're in. It's the H in SHINE also, which is heart. And for that, that's about passion. Like, what do you love to do? right? I don't love to teach science. I've taught it, right? Figured out a strength of it because my strengths come from teaching and knowing strategies and ways to do that, but it's not my passion.
Right.
And so what we really look for is how do we find it so people rise in their happiness, they rise in wanting to be where they are, they rise to their best self and offer their best self then to those that they are taking care of or in a classroom, a school district, whatever that may look like. And we want them to rise in that. So, but that comes from passion, right? So finding the best way. Now, I have so far talked about from the point of an adult,
Right.
but I want to imagine from the view of a kid. If I can learn, totally doable, if I can learn how to teach the strengths of a child to find out what they've learned, but I also tap into the passions they have. So our lessons, for example, explore both of these areas. So how do I tap into the passion of the kids and bring that to the learning? And that's when you start to see the brain research of what I was doing before. My books were based on strategies, how to engage kids. They did. But I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't figure out the piece that was missing. And it's now what we call SEL, social emotional
Mm-hmm.
learning.
Right.
So we pull all of that into this. And so to me, it's you can't have high level achievement if you have not put the brain into a state of learning, which means social emotional learning has to be addressed.
Right.
That is right there. That's a piece of what's happening. Then we get
Yeah.
to letter I. I is inspire. So we know life is going to throw curveballs, right? So you think grit, perseverance, resiliency. How do you inspire yourself? How do you inspire others? And
Mm-hmm.
this is a piece that sometimes in a school, it can be exhausting trying to inspire others, but it's also a critical piece that is often missing. So how do you inspire you? How do you inspire others? When we get to N is navigate. In other words, what are you going to do with everything I just talked about? So it's putting into action plan and putting into play to create the human focused culture by pulling everything we talked about into what you do. So that is really the key piece. And that's the piece where the work comes in, the story, the
Right.
journey. What do you want this to look like? And when we get to E for exceptional, it's because you're becoming the exceptional person you were meant to be, not
Mm-hmm.
anybody else. Stop trying to be others. Be you. Be exceptional
Right.
with who you are. So, exceptional leader, exceptional teacher, exceptional spouse, exceptional family member, friend, whatever it is, it's you settling into who you are so that you ignite your shine.
Right. So, am I right to look at SHINE as both an acronym, but also as a kind of continuum that as I go through the process of developing self, my passion, inspiring, I start to navigate and become, is that fair to look at it that way as well?
Absolutely. And I love that you picked up on that, Tom, because when I first was creating this, I saw exceptional as the result.
Okay.
And then it hit me, we never arrive, right? We're always learning, we're always figuring ourselves out, we're
Mm-hmm.
always changing things because we're human and we love novelty. As much as we
Right.
love structure, we also love non-structure.
Right.
And I don't
Right.
even know if that's I'm throwing that out there. So, and, when we look at this, it's important to understand that it's a process. It's exactly, you are spot on.
Okay. Okay. Because it seems to me that at any given moment, I can present. Exceptional doesn't mean arrival. It means this is the best of who I am in this moment. And that can always be malleable. That can always continue to grow. I can always become a more advanced, a better version of myself. But at the same time, it is who I am, and learning to accept that and thrive in that space, even if I circle back and start to find more passion and to expand myself. I love that. So I want to pick up on something you said. You talked about brain-based and brain research, because I think when people first, if they're not familiar with your work, it would be very easy for people to look at, oh, ignite your shine sounds pretty fluffy. And you, I know, spend a lot of time making sure people understand that there is a neuroscience background to the development of the acronym. That this isn't fluff. So can you make that connection for us? What maybe a deeper connection between the science of the brain and the SHINE acronym, if you will?
Yes. And so I think, thankfully, I think we've made headway on this. I think in the past,
Yeah.
it was like, oh, it's that woo woo stuff. It's that fluff stuff, and oh, here we go, getting all touchy
Yeah.
feely.
Yeah.
Well, we're human. So yes,
That's
and I
right.
think we're finally, that's where social emotional learning, SEL, has gotten its name, and we're making the grounds on this. And so like when you look back at the brain, I hinted at some of this already,
Mhm.
but is the brain in a state of learning? And so you can sit here and say that, oh my goodness, suck it up, buttercup, like let's go. You just need to toughen up. You just need to grow thick skin.
Mm-hmm.
That's nice to say, but that's not internally what's happening with the person. They can put on the front, which means they now put up a wall, and you now reduce psychological safety at that point. And
Right.
so we all come with our own stories, right? We all come with our own experiences, and all of that affects how we look at things. And
Mm-hmm.
so just because I, for example, may have grown up in a situation that was tough and I learned how to go through that, it doesn't mean it's the best way to go through it. It doesn't mean it's the right way to go through it. And just because I figured out a skill set doesn't mean the other person has. Right. So when we think about looking at it from the brain perspective, it's very complex. It really is. But
Yeah.
we can simplify that when you look at Shine, that again, the core components in there are really about the best way you could actually probably say this is confidence.
Yeah.
Right. You can replace the word shine for confidence. That's what it's
Yeah.
about. And confidence does this. Like it is up and down, it's all over the place. And you're never always confident in every situation. And that's something else to keep in mind. And
Yeah.
that's just how the brain operates. We say we're in our comfort zone and we step out of the comfort zone. And if we're successful, it gets bigger. And if we're not, we step back in. And then
Yeah.
hopefully we've created an opportunity that the brain is willing to take risks because we've created the culture that allows that. So you take another risk. Now we
Mm-hmm.
innovate. We're more agile in things that happens like a pandemic.
Right. Right.
There's a lot that comes into it. We build that resiliency and we keep
Mm-hmm.
broadening this out. And
Yeah.
so all of that, will stem from the brain understanding that it's okay to do this and it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to mess up. And we always say, like, you're going to mess up, right? You're human. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not about the actual mistake, right? It's about what you do with the mistake that
Right.
matters. Right. So I'll say it again. It's about what you
Yeah.
do with the mistake that
Right.
matters.
Right. Absolutely. I love, love, love that you use the word confidence because I'm making so many connections to the work that I do in assessment and grading, where my colleagues and I talk about how assessment is not just this clinical exercise in number crunching or gathering evidence, that there is a human being on the other end of the assessment experience, and that assessment should always support and build hope and efficacy, right? Hope being about expectation, my expectations of success, and efficacy being the belief that I can get there, and making sure that nothing we do in our work around assessment, which can be as pressure packed for students as anything they experience in school. I mean, maybe the social environment is pressure packed, but assessment is up there. And I just love the focus on confidence because there's so much overlap to the idea of making sure that whatever assessment strategies you utilize, let's make sure that it maintains and builds student confidence about their eventual success. And that creates that psychological safety space for them to continue to take risks and push their learning. So I just, as you were talking there, I was making so many connections to the sort of sphere of my work in the area of assessment and grading, where it's a hard conversation to have sometimes when you talk assessment, because it can feel very clinical, and yet we can never lose sight of the fact that that student is on the other end of that. I want to talk first about teachers, because one of the interesting things I found is that I think the default when I first heard about you and your work and Ignite Your Shine, I immediately went to the place of students. But you put an interesting twist on it for me, which is that this can also be a framework for teachers. So we know that teaching is such a selfless profession, that teachers are often in positions where they just give of themselves, and so it can be challenging for teachers to kind of focus on themselves, like themselves and their heart and their passions and that and so forth. So during COVID, of course, staff morale has been just taking a beating. And we've become very aware of where teachers are in terms of their collective morale, and even individually their morale as well. So you say that the Ignite Your Shine framework can have a positive impact on staff morale. So tell us how that happens. Tell us how we can use the framework to help maintain and then grow the morale of teachers and educators.
Yeah, so I'm grateful that you made that connection from students to teachers, and its leaders includes, like, we love to work with the whole staff because it's
Mm-hmm.
really a philosophy that you're beginning to understand, a framework, and now you can move the whole school through that, or district. And it's parents, it's families, it's bottom line,
Mm-hmm.
it's any human being. We work
Right.
with corporations on Ignite Your Shine. So
Mm-hmm.
we work with teams, CEO suites and C suites and all that. So It's really for a human, because that's what the bottom line is that it comes down to. And again, I appreciate you bringing up the confidence thing, because that's the biggest thing that we talk about, is that when you're confident, you can get through so many of these things.
Hmm.
So when we look at teachers, we look at morale, a lot has been impacted. If you think about it from the brain perspective, the brain for majority of humans at this point has been in a very heightened cortisol stressful state, which means it's in a state of survival, not in a state of thriving. And so our brain cares about one thing, and that is surviving. So it wants to survive to thrive. And if it's in survival mode, you can't think at the level you want to think. So that frontal lobe's at the very front of the brain here, right behind the forehead, all of that goes into a state of like fear. And the amygdala, which is in the limbic system and deep in the brain, the amygdala is always on alert, and they're teeny tiny. They're almond size, almond shape, and there's two of them in the brain, and they're always watching for our survival. So when we think about teachers who are now adapting to an entire environment that is many cases has been virtual, they have all the tools to learn. No pandemic manual was handed to them or their leaders, like to no one. And now bottom line is everybody's in a state of survival, because it's not only that, they're fearing for their own life. They don't know what this will do to them personally or their loved ones. And so we create this whole heightened, which when we now ask an educator to show up every day and be smiling and cheerful and knock it out of the ballpark and teaching, the crazy part is most teachers do it.
Yeah.
Right, they will rise to the challenge. They're incredible. Educators are just, they blow my mind at how they make things happen. But it doesn't mean that over a period of time like we're having right now, that doesn't create major issues going forward. So one of the things that we've been doing is running faculty meetings for schools. And we come in from that perspective of morale and survival. And we do an activity that essentially reminds them that they've had challenges before. And
Hmm.
all we're doing is reminding the brain, but through this activity, reminding the brain that, wait a minute, we have been here before. We survived. We did okay. Not a pandemic. It's a different situation, but you've been here before as far as the challenges, the emotions. And so once we make that connection, we see a lot of relief. They share in the chat, because we've been doing it virtually, share in the chat the how they feel, and you just see the shift in energy happen. And that's what's important for staff or for administrators to remember, that they themselves do their shine, but the morale within the school, you can only sustain that level for so long before we have to give people a dip and allow them to then literally shine, right? To
Right.
bring them back up and build up that confidence, to get back to some normalcy, reduce the brain and how it's feeling. So there's a lot that goes into it, but it's
Yeah.
definitely possible.
I'm very curious about this idea of you coming in and running a faculty meeting, because obviously that's a very short period of time. So can you give us a sense of what that might look like? If listeners out there are interested in, hey, that's a great idea, I would love to have LaVonna or someone from her team come and facilitate a faculty meeting for us, so we can start to have this. Walk us through what that would look like. What's the structure of it? What are the activities? How do you, in a very short period of time, begin to engineer that conversation?
Yes, so we have, a lot of administrators that we're already connected with. So we have shared with them, how to do this, but you can always reach out to us. We would love to make it happen. It's 45 minutes in length, because we
Okay.
know that, faculty meetings. And to me, if you can put in an email, and allow a moment to have a faculty meeting of connection and bonding. One of the things that we've lost during the pandemic, or feel that we have lost, is that connection. But we do this virtually, and what we're doing is we create extremely interactive, and the way we design the activities to is actually creates a high level connection. As a matter of fact, Tom, I'd be willing to challenge that the connection we create over Zoom, is that's the platform we prefer to use in this
Mhm.
case. So when it comes to Zoom, that we can create a higher level connection than if we're in person. And so the design is around, just again, the challenge with this. We give a moment in breakout rooms, that is where the depth of the connection actually happens. Come back out. We debrief some of the things and realizations of ahas that have occurred from that, which creates more connection, but now as the large faculty. And then we go through the letters of shine, and we talk about the different components and what that looks like for you personally, what it
Right.
looks like for you professionally in your role. And then we
Mhm.
bring it to a close with a fun little activity that I do that most people have never seen before, that involves a science experiment of all things.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. So that's a bit
Can't
of
give
a
it all
teaser.
away. We
Can't
got
give
to
it
have
out.
some
No.
surprises. Some
Absolutely. So
surprises.
I'm really, that really is, an interesting, twist or take on the work, in that you're coming in at a time where the issue of morale is clearly on everybody's minds, and morale is tough to maintain regardless of there being a pandemic, but you add in the stresses that teachers have had over the last calendar 12 months or more with the pandemic. It's just I don't think a lot of people outside of education don't truly appreciate how relentlessly taxing this has been on educators in trying to, and yet, as you say, doing incredible work with students through different platforms and different opportunities. We all had a bit of a shock and awe last spring, but boy, oh boy, the work I'm seeing teachers doing, I'm sure you're seeing the same thing, is incredibly inspiring, despite all of the obstacles and challenges that they face with the pandemic. You talked a little bit about, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that for sure, 100%.
Yeah.
But also, what we've been doing a lot of work with administrators lately
Yeah.
because we know it's the trickle down effect, and so the teachers have been taking care of the students, administrators are taking care of the teachers, but who's taking care of the administrators?
Right.
And so I think it's important for them to, and this is what I love about that faculty meeting too, is that I tell them, like, our team is here to take care of you. You literally show up for the faculty meeting. You have to do nothing else. Let us run it. Let you connect and bond with your own staff.
Right. That's a great point. Now, beyond the hiring you for the faculty meeting, I want to just go on a bit of a tangent here for leaders. So principals, even assistant principals, or even we can think about superintendents, et cetera. But let's talk about the school principal. What else can they do with a level of intentionality that really starts to direct attention toward teachers and their own shine? How do we as a school leader, what can we do to be purposeful about that work?
So one of it is going to be knowing your staff.
Okay.
We hear that, just like we say to teachers, you should know your students, know their names, know how it's said. But we go deeper than that. It's, do you actually know the strengths of your teachers? And do you remind them of that when they need it? Do you look at it when you're switching, like whether it's content areas or switching grade levels? Are you looking at the letters of S.H.I.N.E? Does it actually make sense? Because the moment you put a teacher into a situation that is not a passion of theirs, they will make it happen for a while. Like, that's again what teachers do. But what you're happening is if I put my hand up high, and again, I know some are listening to this, so I put my hand up high and I think we start to go down a slope. That's what's happening to that teacher. It's the same thing when we have a teacher who says yes to everything. They are a stellar teacher. They're the the star in the school. We have several of them. What we end up doing, we burn them out because we give them so much. So instead, if you look at the strengths across your staff, for example, look at their passions, now that's different. The way you do content that they're in, what grade level they're in, the committees they're serving on, the projects that they're a part of, committees, like all of that now begins to take a different view as to how that's done. And so when we do that, people start to live in that excitement and they have that energy. And right there is a shift with culture. And then we get, if you think that I mainly touched on S&H, but again, it's that inspiration. So how are you creating this? And one of the number one things I would encourage leaders to do is ask your staff. Just ask them. So many times we think we have to, administrate. I see it in Facebook groups that I'm in, like I've spent $3,000 trying to, give out Starbucks gift cards and trying to do this and that. When has anyone ever taken the moment just to ask them, like, what is it that they want? Because maybe they could care less about that. And maybe what they want is actually something you could do for free or takes a second of your time. But we a lot of times don't have these discussions to really get to know our staff to make these decisions.
Yeah. It's interesting as you're talking there, I'm thinking about school leaders, really investing in understanding the strengths and the passions of their teachers. And it seems to me that almost creates a kind of inertia where if we continue to highlight for others what their strengths are and help them find their passions, they themselves become inspired, which allows them to navigate and therefore manifest the exceptional side of themselves. I'm sort of seeing that almost, if you were to take the acronym, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm seeing principals investing disproportionately in the S and the H, and therefore being able to sort of produce this kind of momentum for people. Is that a fair way to look at it?
Yes, because you're showing that you care. You're uplifting your people. You're putting them in the sweet spot. We call it the shine spot, but the sweet spot of where they best live. And it's important for educators to also understand that it's not just about in the school building. It's also what they're doing personally. Are they embedding those moments in?
Yeah, you feel free to make up as many words as you want, listeners. As you navigate the Ignite Your Shine website, you'll notice that there's a lot of different words. Instead of workshops, they're called fun shops, and I love that. So you feel free to make up as many words as you want. Let's pivot now to students, and I believe you subscribe, as I do, that social emotional learning is most impactful and long lasting when it's taught within the context of the intended learning outcomes or the standards and not treated as this separate silo. So how do teachers use the Ignite Your Shine framework to teach and promote social emotional competencies within the intended standards? So let's triangulate that. You've got the Ignite Your Shine framework, we've got social emotional competencies, and we've got the standards and the intended learning. Help us bring those three things together to talk about what teachers would do to bring that about in their classrooms.
I love this question, Tom, because you're speaking right to my heart, which you've shared as your heart too.
Yeah.
That so many times what's happening right now is, oh my goodness, I have all this SEL to teach. I already had this much to teach in this teeny tiny amount of time, and now I've got to add SEL in. Nope, it's why we created a fun shop. I'm glad you pointed that out, a fun note and a fun shop. Because we believe in having fun interaction. I mean, you can't talk about the brain and then not model it, right? So. Right. It's all blended together, but we created a fun shop called Content and SEL Unite because we shouldn't be seeing them as separate things. What really is happening is that we blend it, and it's so easy if you think about like a historical character, or, a historical figure, I should say. And you're talking about what they did, whether it was right or wrong in history, you're talking about what they did. That is an incredible opportunity to pull in SEL right then. Why did they make that decision? What else could they have done? Who did it impact positively or negatively? Like some of the questions we've already done, but we've never looked at it through the lens of SEL. But then even adding in other things, especially self-awareness, having students think and reflect about it for themselves. I think about a character in a book. What do you think they should do next? Now, we haven't read what they did, but what do we think they should do next? What would be some decisions? And based upon the decisions that you listed, would they be ones like, are these good ones, great ones, not ones we should do? Still a choice to do, but no, not a good one. You're getting kids to reflect on themselves, how they would handle it. You're getting them to reflect on, okay, that is a choice, but is it a good choice?
Right. I find so often that we and maybe it's a natural tendency for teachers to silo things, but I think there's just so many opportunities to infuse and naturally, blend competencies inside of a context. Because as you mentioned, you look at history, or if you look at writing or you look at even scientific decisions or pivots that happen in science where we gain new knowledge. There's always a human side to that. There's always a humanity that makes the decision, or there's a human side that has to endure the residual effects of different decisions. And I think bringing that brings learning to life. It makes the human side of learning more tangible and more real, as opposed to it being just something clinical that I read about in a book. So I really subscribe to that notion as well, and I certainly appreciate that. Okay, so as we sort of finish up here with the framework, I'm hoping you can walk us through each aspect, and let's maybe get a little bit more granular with the framework as far as teachers and what are some things they can do. So we know that, for example, the focus on self is to focus on strength. So I guess what I'm getting at is asking you to give us some specific sort of strategies or approaches that would allow us to address each one of the letters, if you will, in the acronym: the self, the heart, inspire, navigate, exceptional. So in terms of what teachers can do positively and to permanently impact all of their shines, if you will, what does that look like in a classroom? What are some specific things teachers would be doing to address each of those areas?
Well, I would definitely encourage anyone who's listening to go to igniteyourshine.com and click on our learning library, because we have free lessons in there. Fantastic. And they are lessons that can be, one's an overview of what S.H.I.N.E is, and they're videos of me that you show to students. And so I'm talking to the students, sharing with them information, and then there's hands-on lessons that go with them. And it's 2 per letter that we have, plus in like culminating one at the end. And we also have ones in there that are meant for virtually for teachers, and we have
Mm.
some for parents slash caretakers to be able to implement too. And so one of the things that when we think about strengths that we encourage you to do is to have those conversations around strengths. So it can be a personal reflection too. It can be, well, I see my 5 classmates here and I know so and so, they are phenomenal at this. I know their strength. And they have a chance to start sharing the great things about each other, which is going to bring the class together. And they're going to realize, wait a minute, I didn't know you saw that about me. Wow, you do know that. So we start building this collaboration. So again, it goes back to some of those discussions you're going to have, but it's getting kids to realize this too, not just the teacher sharing it, but students having an opportunity. So we have in there, for example, one of the lessons is an all about me quiz. And so they answer questions and then they end up being put into one of 4 light sources. So it sounds like a label, and I'm very persistent, I guess would be the best word, that this isn't about labeling kids. What it's about is creating a creating segments that then allow discussions. So for example, if the 4 light sources are, it's a traffic light, it's a lighthouse, fire, or I'm going blank on, oh, sun, like the sun up in the sky. And so when they take this, they find out, and we have just arbitrarily sat down. This was not like some third party research thing, but we sat down and they said, okay, if you're a sun, when we think about a sun, we think of compassionate, warm, friendly, caring of others. And so what ends up happening is that they end up being one of the 4 light sources, when all reality, they're actually all of them. Right. But what ends up happening is they find some similarities and they sit with groups. And we've done this a variety of ways. When I work in schools, the way I have the teachers do it to go through this is they go to the corner of the room that has to do with their light source, and they have to create a statue that represents the meaning of who they are.
Mm.
But what we're really doing is we're noticing similarities between students, which is really cool when students do this, because they may have someone in the group that they didn't like. And now you've created a whole similarity for them to discuss and a connection. But then we also facilitate discussions amongst all 4 light sources of how really we are all of them. And hey, just because I'm not great at this, what's awesome is you are. So would you be able to support me and help me when I need it? And I'd be happy to do the same for you with my strengths. So that's an example of one.
Yeah. That's, it's interesting because you're so spot on with the idea of labels, and labels can certainly be limiting and restricting and not trying to label. But at the same time, there is something to naming and noticing myself and knowing kind of where my strengths lie. And that's not to restrict me, but it's more to understand me and understand, what I would be, what I'm about and who I am as an individual. And that level of awareness or metacognition, not just who I am as a person, but who I am as a learner, is such a valuable skill for all of us, never mind a student. It's a skill for adults to have as well, because I'm sure, as I do, there are many adults who don't have a level of awareness that might be good for them to develop a little bit in our society. That's for sure. LaVonna, I really, really have enjoyed our, talking about. I just, you can't come away from this conversation without feeling good. You have a way of energizing the conversation, and certainly I appreciate and tremendously respect the work that you're doing. And I think obviously at some point I'm gonna find an excuse to have you back and continue to dig deep into the work, and have listeners, share maybe at a deeper level, just some of the things that you're finding and uncovering in your own research and your own work and your own sort of experiences with schools. But we're going to finish up with a segment that I call 3 questions, where we're going to take even though this has been very light, and not light as in not serious, but it's an uplifting conversation. We're going to have a little fun now, which is I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and I have a bonus question after. So there's actually going to be 4. We've got 3 questions that'll be kind of these fun, lighthearted questions. I do this with every interviewee during the interviews, and it's just a chance for listeners to get to know LaVonna a little bit on a personal level. Nothing too intrusive, but certainly fun to kind of get your perspective on these arbitrary, random, meaningless questions that I'm about to ask you. So here's the first one. The first one is a choice. Would you rather be able to breathe underwater or fly through the air?
Fly through the air.
Okay.
Hands down.
Hands down. How come?
Because I love to travel and I love flying in a plane because I can see the world from a different perspective and see so much more.
Yeah.
And so as much as I love dolphins, it'd be cool to breathe underwater and swim with them. But no,
Yeah.
absolutely just to be
Yeah.
able to feel that freedom of flying.
Yeah, I think I would probably choose the same. Second one, would you rather be fluent in all languages or be a master of every musical instrument?
Fluent in all languages.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah, which is a challenge. I play the piano, flute, and piccolo. So it's funny when you say musical instruments,
Wow. Okay. Didn't know that.
but yeah, I don't actually really talk about that much. So, because I don't have a piano anymore or a flute or a piccolo, but I can still
Okay.
play. Like I know my sister has a flute, so
Yeah.
I have a chance to play hers every now and then. But no, fluent in all languages. I actually, when I was about to be kicked out of college, for my grades, I was in a desperate situation and I pulled the university catalog because I always wanted to learn sign language. When I worked at McDonald's, and which was my first job, I encountered a man who would come in and point to the pictures because he was deaf and we couldn't communicate. And then in
Hmm.
college, I had a job and that deaf couple came in, couldn't communicate. So I wanted to learn sign language. So I looked it up, but in order to take sign language, you had to go into deaf education. So that's when I
Hmm.
became a teacher for the deaf. And I learned to
Ah,
sign. And
wow.
I hate barriers. I hate barriers being able to
Yeah.
communicate and connect with humans.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. That's very impressive. All of it, learning to sign, playing the instruments. Are you someone who, coming back after a long day of workshopping and dinner, you walk into the hotel lounge and sort of saunter up to the piano and start to play? Are you one that just impromptu plays, or do you feel like you're a little bit out of practice?
Out of practice, and I've never, even though I did competitions, recitals, I hate playing in front of people. We had a piano at one
Okay.
point, and my husband was just like, "How come you won't play in front of me?" And I'm like, "Because it's a de-stressor for me. And when I have people listening, it stresses me out. It's no longer
Right,
me
right,
getting relaxed."
right. So you have all this talent that you don't want to share with people,
I
but
hide
I
it.
understand that. That's right. Well, maybe one day we'll get you to play piano. I don't know how. Maybe you can record yourself and we'll put it on the podcast. I don't know. We'll figure that out down the road. All
I
right,
love
last one, or not last one. I've got two more for you, but the last would you rather question is: would you rather be known as a one-hit wonder as a novelist, like you wrote a novel, you're a one-hit wonder, or would you rather be a one-hit wonder with a song?
a song.
A song. Okay.
Yes. Songs tap into our memory, emotions. We connect with them. They can change the state that we're in with the brain. It can change our mood.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I'd rather have the song to have an opportunity to impact others.
Yeah. And I think the other part of songs is that people tend to listen to songs thousands of times.
That's true.
Yeah. A couple of weeks ago on the podcast, I talked about happiness booster, and the happiness booster for me is music. It's an instant mood changer for me. So whenever I'm feeling my thoughts are going down a negative path, or I'm feeling a little defeatist with work or whatever, music instantly it's an instant mood maker. And I think that people read a book maybe once, maybe twice, then it sits on a shelf. Whereas your one hit wonder is going to be, I still listen to songs from when I was a child that I remember. And the example I gave on the podcast a couple of weeks ago was Fleetwood Mac's Rumors. I got that album for my 10th birthday and I still love that album and I still listen to it. And
That's awesome.
that's 43 years ago. So I mean, that music is so enduring, like it's long lasting. So here's the bonus
Yeah.
question. Listeners, you probably don't know this. Some of you will, most of you probably don't. LaVonna is a diehard hockey fan, and that of course warms every Canadian's heart. LaVonna is a diehard Tampa Bay Lightning fan. I believe you're a season ticket holder, if I'm not mistaken. I see you at the games on Instagram all the time. You're not a season ticket holder? No. Okay. But you do go to the games quite frequently. So where did that come from? How did you become such a big hockey fan?
So I wasn't, but when you live with a husband who is,
Ah, okay. The influence
it's
of the
by
spouse.
yes, it's by default. My husband is a huge hockey fan, huge
Okay.
hockey fan. And then my bonus son, which is his, biological son, but my bonus
Yeah.
son played
Yeah.
ice hockey. And so when I came into the picture, he was already playing travel hockey. And so
Ah,
I learned like hockey with that. And then you get into the city. In our city, I live in Tampa. And so it's all about the lightning, And so you see people, it doesn't matter whether we are in season, off season, it doesn't matter. Everyone's wearing it. And then I started
mhm.
going to the games, which says a lot for me, Tom, because I just want you
Yeah.
to know I hate to be cold. It's why I moved to Florida. But you can bundle up and go feel the energy and watch the players and just
Yeah.
how stellar they are. Because the reason I didn't like hockey, and I hate to say it, I didn't like it before was because I didn't like the fights. Right?
Right.
Like I don't like people hurting other people. I now
Hmm.
understand it's the culture of the game and I understand why they do it to rev up energy. And so now I have an appreciation, not still for the fights, but I have an appreciation for it and just learning more. Like it's fun. And the games, there's nothing like a hockey game. Like
Yeah.
the action is constant,
Hmm.
so you can't get bored.
It's one of those interesting things when people ask me about hockey, of course, because being Canadian, it's a requirement by law, as I said to you earlier,
It's in the blood. It's in the
it's in the
blood.
blood. It's one of those sports where I tell people until you go to a game live, you're going to have a hard time. Like if you're new to the sport, don't watch it on TV until you've been to a live game, because once you've watched it live, you'll be able to understand more what you're seeing on TV. It's in some sports, if it's not part of your culture, whereas for other sports, like you grow up watching football or you grow up watching baseball or you grow up watching basketball, you kind of have an instinct about it. But if hockey is not on your radar, really try to get to a game live, and then you'll kind of understand the ebb and flow, because it's hard to follow the puck for sure. But I love the Instagram posts where you're at the lightning games, and certainly all of us hockey fans are envious of the Stanley Cup championship and the run that the Lightning have been on. And we talked before we hit record that Tampa is on a roll now with the Super Bowl, the Stanley Cup, almost had the World Series, and certainly some would argue a ill-timed pitching change during the World Series probably cost the World Series. But this could be quite the run for Tampa if that was all going on. So really, just impressed. So now I know more about the hockey fandom and where that's come from. So I'm happy you've joined the club. One final
Me too.
question
Me
for you. Yeah, one final question for you, LaVonna. It's a question I ask all interviewees as we close out the interview, and it's a theme of success and happiness as I run through the podcast and think and ask everybody the same question. And the question is, if a random person stopped you on the street and asked you, what is your definition of success, how would you respond to them?
I think success is different for everyone, but a phrase that I might use would be contentment with a nudge.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of times we can be afraid to go after success. It's that fear that settles in, that lack of confidence in that moment. But if you can take a risk and then feel the contentment from that, the happiness, that's another word would definitely pop in my head. That
Mm-hmm.
contentment though from it, but to nudge yourself to go again. Because what really happens is that we're not content as humans with staying in the same place. We want to grow. That's a need, a desire that we have. And
Yeah.
so if you're content, now have that nudge, right? You're feeling success. You're
Mm-hmm.
content again, feel
Yep.
that nudge. But don't
Right.
just feel it, do something with it.
Right. Yeah, I love that. Listeners, you'll remember, we Muhammad Khalifa, who I had on last week, also talked about the difference between contentment and complacency, right? The idea that you don't want to be complacent, but you want to be content with who you are. I absolutely love that framing of success around contentment with a nudge. You just have a way of crafting that little extra. I love that, the idea of being content, but you want to keep growing and you want to keep pushing yourself in all the right ways and all the positive ways. So I really do appreciate that. Listeners, you can follow and really should follow LaVonna on Twitter. Her Twitter handle is at LaVonna Roth, just as it sounds and is spelled. You also should follow Ignite Your Shine Now. So at Ignite Your Shine Now on Instagram is the Instagram account to follow there as well. LaVonna is also on LinkedIn, LaVonna Roth on LinkedIn. You can tap in there, and also the Ignite Your Shine website. So it's igniteyourshine.com. And it's a fabulous website, LaVonna. I just want to say that it's really, really user-friendly, really great graphics. The optics of it are fantastic, and there's a tremendous amount of great information on the website. So listeners would really encourage you to head there as well. So LaVonna, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. Thanks so much, and I look forward to next time.
Thank you, Tom. And I also want to say thank you to you because you're making an impact with all you're doing with this podcast that you're reaching. So you're very much appreciated and valued.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. In Assessment Corner this week, I want to finish my exploration of homework. Now, look, finish might be a little optimistic here. I'm under no illusion that two 10 to 15 minute segments on a podcast is going to tie a bow on the homework dilemma. But you know what I mean by that. We're going to just sort of finish off our thinking around that. And you'll recall last week we talked about what role homework plays in learning. And I shared with you the LaVonna Roth quote about the value of research being in the broad strokes it paints, not in the minutia. And that we have to think about, do those results in the research make sense for our population of students, et cetera. I also shared some thoughts from Harris Cooper from Duke University, who is arguably considered one of the thought leaders when it comes to homework. I shared with you the quote, homework for young students should be short, lead to success without much struggle, occasionally involve parents, and when possible, use out-of-school activities that kids enjoy, such as their sports teams or high-interest reading. So again, we talked about expanding the possibilities of what homework could be. Cooper also said that there is some validity to the 10-minute rule, as in the grade level number multiplied by 10 minutes gives you a ballpark number of the number of minutes that students should be spending on homework in total, not per subject, but in total. So grade 1 multiplied by 10, that's 10 minutes total per evening, and that includes, high interest reading activities, etc. Grade 6, of course, that would be an hour. And if you're in the 12th grade senior year, that's 2 hours. But again, that's the total for all subjects, not just per subject. I often talk about Harris Cooper's work, and LaVonna Roth's as well, in workshops, because so many participants haven't heard of them and haven't sort of looked at their research. And, I wonder sometimes, why is it that we're so unfamiliar with those folks doing the research? I have my suspicions, and I suspect that it's at least partly because the researchers don't succumb to ranting through hyperbole, which in this day and age, as you've heard me say many times on the podcast, seems to be the way of going about the business. So if you don't rant and rave and you don't take extreme positions, you kind of go unnoticed, unfortunately. We also talked about John Hattie's effect size, 0.29. It's not huge, but it's not nothing. So the idea being that homework can help, but it's not the main driver of learning. The bottom line is homework can play a role in enhancing a learner's learning, but there needs to be some thoughtfulness behind it. Okay, so that leads to the second question I posed last week, which we're going to pick up on this week, which is the question of, should homework contribute in any way to a student's achievement grade? Now, the short answer to that question is no. Most of the time, the answer is no, for two reasons. First, we know some students need longer to learn, and often homework is assigned after one lesson. The idea that we would teach a lesson once and ask the students then to work independently to show a level of proficiency without any feedback or supplemental support or more practice seems overly optimistic. We're good teachers. Many of you are great teachers. But let's not get crazy here. We're not that good, where we can teach a lesson once, and 30 to 35 diverse learners will all reach an exemplary level of understanding with no feedback, no intervention. So some students need longer to learn is the first reason. The second reason homework really shouldn't contribute to a student's grade most of the time is you don't know who did the work. If what students do outside of school is going to contribute in any small, medium, or large way to their grade, we have to at least have some assurance. I mean, you can't know for sure, but you have to have some assurance that what the students have demonstrated is actually their demonstration of learning. I mean, that was always my litmus test when I first began this journey. Early on in this assessment journey, as I was transforming my own classroom, I used to always ask myself, how easy is this to copy? That was the test. Now, I love what my friend and colleague Eileen Depka has to say in her book, Bringing Homework into Focus. And her notion is not to start with the question of whether or not to grade, but to think about what type of work it is. So here's what Eileen had to say, quote, "When it comes to grading homework, we're asking the wrong question. The question is not whether to grade work completed outside of the classroom, but instead, what type of work is it? Is the work formative and intended to provide further experiences for students to apply the content or skills? Is the work summative and assigned after students have had ample opportunity to practice?" End quote. I think that's the important thing to think about. Notice that last phrase, ample opportunity to practice. That's a really important distinction, to make the distinction between homework as practice and homework as extension. When we assign homework, or homework kind of evolves out of student learning as practice, that's usually when we're talking about skill development. We're often building foundational skills, foundational understanding. I mean, we're going to go deeper than that, but we need to build that foundation from which we will go deeper. It usually comes, very early in the progression, that homework as practice. And this is where we want to think about not grading that work, but really prioritizing feedback and next steps in learning. Now, there are times where student demonstrations that are produced at home actually will count toward a student's grade. So again, there's homework, and then there's work done at home. This is where you're engaging students in deeper learning. You may be connecting multiple standards with this kind of project or research paper or whatever whatever they're working on. Often there's a level of authenticity or real world application or original thinking involved in what the students are producing at home. And so if the students have had ample time to practice, and if they have familiarity with the material and the topic at hand, then maybe you decide to grade that. You have to judge that, whether or not that's something that you would grade or something that you would contribute, as long as they've had that ample opportunity. So you as the teacher, of course, you're going to use your judgment to decide whether or not there has been enough opportunity to practice, and therefore this is something that represents original thinking, and therefore it's something that could contribute to their report card grade, right? Now, the other issue that often comes up for teachers, and we'll just talk about this on a slight tangent here, is that, teachers say, I don't really assign homework, but when students don't, complete the tasks in class, and I give them a reasonable amount of time to finish it, and they don't make good use of class time, then they have to finish that for homework. Yeah. So work that's finished at home because of a misuse of classroom time, well, that's a totally different issue that we're talking about there. That's on the students if they haven't made ample use of the time available. So again, just making sure that what you're asking them to complete is, reasonable and all of that. So I want to sort of close out this segment by offering you 6 questions that you can ask of your homework practices. And these are 6 questions that come out of the book Grading from the Inside Out. And when the section where I talk about repurposing homework, I just want to share with you 6 questions that I think can guide your decisions around homework, okay? So the first question I would ask of any homework assignment, if that's what you're doing, if you're assigning something for homework, is ask yourself, is it truly learning centered? Now, I know that sounds basic and fundamental, but I can tell you that in the past, I know I've been guilty of assigning busy work for homework because I wanted to make sure that parents had the illusion of rigor, because even early in my career, back in the early 90s, I even equated rigor to volume. How much homework students were getting was how rigorous my classroom was, and that clearly is not the case. Rigor is about cognitive complexity. So it's not volume. We want to make sure that the homework is focused on the learning. That's probably the easiest one for teachers to accomplish of all of them, but it's still something to think about. There are times where we assign busy work, but make sure that what you're asking students to do at home is truly learning centered on what the learning goals were for that day or for that week or whatever. Second question I would ask is it necessary? Again, I think there's some credibility that teachers gain with their students when at times you say to them, listen, we are exactly where we need to be going into tomorrow. So there is no extra practice tonight. We're good. Because a couple of days later, you might have to go back to them and say, okay, after today's lesson, listen, we need to do a little practice tonight because we're not quite ready for what tomorrow has in store. So let's sort of do a little bit of practice, right? And that can help students see that there's, relevance to what it is they're doing. I think, with homework, you're either deepening the understanding from today, or you're having them do some advanced learning that has some utility in tomorrow's lessons, right? And that could be one of the answers students need to the question, why are we doing this? Why are we learning this? Sometimes, not the only reason, but sometimes they ask that question because they don't see the big picture. It just feels like you're making them do something because you're the teacher. So open their eyes to that, right? Is it learning centered? Is it necessary? The third question is it reasonable? Okay. Now for me, What I learned throughout the course of my career is that the policy that should override all policies is the policy of reasonableness, and making sure that we are, with the homework context, we're thinking about a reasonable amount. And remember, last week we talked about how teachers aren't great at predicting how long homework is going to take. And therefore students get overwhelmed because teachers think it's not going to take very much time, and it ends up taking a lot longer. So make sure you check in with your students to find out, was that a reasonable expectation? Is it a reasonable amount? Is it a reasonable, expectation going into tomorrow? We want to make sure, as Harris Cooper says, homework can be impactful and positive as long as it doesn't end up being too much. Too much, sort of ends up eliminating all of the potential positives that come from students doing extra practice at home. Question 4, is it of high quality? Again, we want deep, rich, thoughtful things. Have kids synthesize, have them tie into their extracurricular activities, have them do things that are quite relevant. We don't want that busy work. Okay, that to me is just those days are over. The packets, I'm going to make you do things in the evening. Again, we have to go back to the question of why. Okay, that is a fundamental question with homework. Why am I assigning this? Think about Eileen Depka's. What type of work is this? Is it formative? Is it intended to be formative? Is it summative? If it is, have they had ample opportunity to practice? I don't think you ever go wrong in assessment when you emphasize quality over quantity. So with homework, think about quality. Question number 5 is, are the students ready? Some students aren't completing their homework and not able to demonstrate an understanding because they're not ready to work independently, right? And it creates a little desperation. And so this is why students start copying each other, especially if you're going to score it. If there's an overtone of scoring and checking and compliance, you're going to create a desperate kind of moment for many students. Some students need longer to learn. We said that earlier. Therefore, there are going to be students, especially if they're not familiar with the learning, there are going to be students who can't do it. They're not ready to work independently. Now, as soon as you take grading and scoring off the table with homework, suddenly we don't care if they get help from others. If they don't, they get support from their friends, or they get support from their families or their older sibling or whatever. It doesn't matter because learning is the goal, right? Not acquiring points or reaching proficiency levels. But we have to coach the students a little bit on this one because, I told my students back in the day, I want you to ask your friends. I want you to seek help from your families. But here's the question I want you to ask them. Don't ask them, what'd you get for number 1? Ask them, how do you do number 1, right? How do I procedurally? What's the thinking here? So that kind of approach, right? I think it's important to kind of coach them a little bit to say, look, this is a learning opportunity for you. So make it a learning opportunity and allow others to kind of help you learn, because eventually I'm going to ask you to do this independently and show me that you've reached proficiency. So you might feel like copying other students is a short-term win, but it might bring about a long-term loss, so to speak. So we want to make sure we coach them on that. So encourage them to do the homework together, and in this era, do it on FaceTime or Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever. Like, do it together, work together, talk together, engineer those conversations, give them the opportunity to do that. But just make sure that they're ready to work independently. And if they're not, just encourage them to work with others. And then the last question is, were the students involved at all in any small, medium, or large way involved in choosing what was for homework, right? So this is an opportunity for you to differentiate for readiness. Whether there's, an authentic opportunity for real agency or whether you can just tailor, the assignment a little bit for where they're at, just allowing them the opportunity to have some direction or guidance, or at least to shape a little bit about what's for homework will definitely go a long way. Again, I'm not saying that you have to ask all 6 questions each time, but what I would do is consider all 6 more holistically as you kind of shape what the homework routine is in your classroom. So again, is it learning centered? Is it necessary? Is it a reasonable amount? Is it of high quality? Are the students ready to work independently? And were they involved at all in choosing what was for homework or having some direction there? Yes, homework can be effective, But that effectiveness is not automatic. It's not about just assigning homework. The effectiveness comes with the quality of what you're asking students to do and to think about. So you have to be very purposeful about what you're asking them to do, make some relevant connections for them into their life outside of school. Again, make sure you're reasonable about the time you're asking students to continue learning at home. Consider the amount of support available. Make sure that we understand that, again, as we said last week, often homework tests the socioeconomic status and the level of education of the parents and families and those who are at home to support the kids or the teenagers, etc. So be mindful of that and make sure that it's a reasonable expectation. Number 3, combine the research with your experience and pay close attention to how students respond so that you can create a meaningful learning experience for all of them. So pay attention to how they respond to the homework, pay attention to all of that. So make sure on our end, we're thinking about high quality work and demonstrations of learning and deeper, rich learning experiences. And at the same time, just pay attention to their reactions, their emotions, their facial expressions, their body language. All of that is going to tell you a ton about how effective your routine is at this moment. And honestly, steer clear of using homework as any kind of leverage or consequence or carrot, so that the conflating of practice with punishment is avoided. Okay, we need to avoid that. We can't have students equating the extension of learning or the deepening of learning at home with a kind of consequence for inappropriate behavior. Like, if you don't stop that, I'm going to double your homework tonight. That's turning a potentially positive learning experience into a big negative. And that's going to have a completely different impact on students. And their mindset around working at home is going to feel adversarial with their teacher. So be careful about that, right? Homework should only be about learning. So we know homework can positively impact students and positively impact their growth and journey along their learning progressions to reach proficiency. But it's not as simple as assigning it. We have to be incredibly purposeful and very thoughtful about what we ask learners to do on their own time at home, and making sure that whatever we do, what we're asking them to do is high quality, deep, rich learning experiences. Okay, a few announcements before we close out today. Just a reminder about the Achieve Institute, which is the institute focused on promising practices in instruction, assessment, and grading. That's going to be virtual this August 16 through 18, and that features myself, Cassandra Erkins, Nicole Dimich, and Katie White. Now, in support of that event, this coming April 27th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, so that's 9 a.m. Pacific Time, we're going to be hosting a 1-hour free webinar. That's with, again, myself, Cassandra, Nicole, Katie, a free webinar called Designing Assessments That Empower the Whole Student. Really centered around talking about meeting the challenges of classroom assessments today and kind of leading into that event. So that's free. I'll put links in the show notes for both the free webinar as well as the conference coming this August. So again, you can also go to solutiontree.com to get details for that event as well. Now, the reminder also of the Google survey for the summer series. I'm just getting ready to close that out a little bit, and I'll have to start organizing the topics for the summer. But thank you to those of you who've responded so far. Just follow the link in the show notes if you haven't contributed already. Would love to hear from you about what topics we should be covering this summer. Remember to follow the podcast Twitter accounts. That's at Tom Schimmer Pod. You can follow me on Twitter as well. That's at Tom Schimmer. Schimmer Education on Facebook, Tom Schimmer Podcast on Instagram. You can connect through all those different ways. And don't forget about the YouTube channel as well, Tom Schimmer Podcast on YouTube. And please email your questions for Assessment Corner or any suggestions you have for the podcast. That's tomschimmerpod@gmail.com. Next week, my guest will be Catlin Tucker. Catlin is an expert on blended learning, so that'll be our topic next week. Please subscribe, follow, rate, review the podcast, especially on Apple Podcasts, of course. And as always, if you like what you hear, please spread the word about the podcast to your friends and your colleagues. Have a great week, everyone.